Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you. I want to dive into a topic with you today that I believe is really important in this time of Elul, as we're approaching the high holidays and are invited to engage in the practice of cheshbon hanefesh, which means soul accounting or honest self-reflection. Right? So it's a time when we're really encouraged to look honestly and with kindness at our lives, at our actions, and the impact of our actions over the past year, to find whether or not we're living in alignment with our intentions. And sometimes this can feel like a kind of browbeating process, right? It can sometimes feel harsh. And it is actually so important that when we find places where we may have missed the mark, that our honest looking is also infused with chesed, right? That the emet, the truthful seeing of that, is also kind. And that the self-forgiveness process that sometimes is needed is also enveloped in compassion. Because it is not through shaming or making wrong that healing and growth and learning can happen. And so I want to practice with you today in this idea of self-compassion, which is basically caring for ourselves when we suffer as we would care for someone who we truly love. So sometimes it's a lot easier to feel compassion and forgiveness for others, or even to grant forgiveness to someone else, than it is for ourselves. And in the practice of self-compassion, we're practicing treating ourselves the way that we would a beloved. There is a wonderful teacher, Dr. Kristen Neff, who really lifts up this idea of self-compassion. And she lifts up 3 components of self-compassion that I want to share with you. So the first kind of step in awakening this quality is mindfulness. Being aware of what is happening, acknowledging that sometimes we can feel quite lost, especially in the presence of suffering or intense emotion, which has the tendency to pull on the strands of stories that we can easily become lost in. And so mindfulness in a way simplifies our experience of what is happening. It helps us to bring awareness to the experience and to name what we are experiencing. There's this concept in practice, name it to tame it. If we can name it and drop the story, it becomes a lot easier to understand and respond to what's happening. So just naming whatever's true in the moment. I'm feeling shame, I'm feeling regret, or I'm feeling anxiety. Oh gosh, so sorry. See, right now I'm feeling a little regret and embarrassment. Forgot to put on my do not disturb. There we go. Naming what is happening in the moment. And in that way, sitting in the seat of observation, right? Being able to witness what's happening rather than being lost in it, which gives us more capacity to choose a compassionate response. That's the first step, mindfulness. And the second step is self-kindness. That's the choice point, choosing to soothe ourselves, to respond kindly, not to make the pain go away, not to make what is happening wrong, but rather because we are in pain, acknowledging that that might be true and expressing care for that experience. And then finding a sense of common humanity. So acknowledging that we are not alone in our suffering. And this is something that is really critical also to our work of the high holidays, where we have to come together as an be'agudat achat. It's a spiritual community, one, almost as if we have one soul, in spirit of unity, in community with others, to speak before the divine the truth of what we have done over the past year, the impact of our actions in their fullness. We come before the divine for this confession, whether it feels real or metaphorical or symbolic, as one spiritual unit, which is acknowledging that we are not alone in our human experience, in any of it, from the greatest successes and most beautiful experiences to the failings and the places where we miss the mark. So finding and remembering that sense of common humanity, that we are not alone in our suffering, because when we believe that we're the only one who experiences whatever it is, it can exacerbate it and lead to isolation. But when we acknowledge the humanity of whatever it is that might be arising, we can reframe our situation in the light of that shared human experience and the truth that we are always in connection to others. And one of the beautiful fruits of that acknowledging is that we can also then feel compassion for others, right? It's like, oh, this is suffering. This is what shame feels like. This is what embarrassment feels like. This is what fear feels like, whatever it is. And then, wow, others feel this too. I'm not alone in this. I can extend and open my heart to others that also experience this suffering. And I want to just acknowledge that it's not always easy. Self-compassion, I want to acknowledge what it's not. It's not self-pity. So it's not getting lost in the stories about how bad everything is, but acknowledging the simple truth of what is happening. It's not self-indulgence, so it's not selfish. Rather, it makes us more equipped to show up for others, understanding that we're not so separate. So our own compassion for ourselves is innately connected to our capacity to feel compassion for others. And just to share from my own experience, I know for myself, there was a massive turning point in my own healing journey and my journey of deepening in mindfulness, in the cultivation of insight, when I realized that there was another option other than dismissing my pain. So I grew up in a way where it was kind of assumed that if you felt a more challenging emotion, that was bad, that was wrong in some way, and was in the habit of just dismissing those harder experiences when they arose. And it was a real game changer for me when I was encouraged by a teacher on retreat, actually, rather than dismissing or making wrong when suffering arose for myself, to hold myself the way I would a small child, to really comfort and affirm what was happening, and also to remind myself that it would pass. There's a beautiful story from Tara Brach, the wonderful meditation teacher, about a student of hers, a woman who for many, many years kept experiencing failed relationships. She would get into a relationship with someone else, and she would get so anxious about being abandoned that it would lead to self-sabotage. And then she began to practice mindfulness. And she began to practice being with those feelings of anxiety and inquiring what was underneath the anxiety. And underneath the anxiety, she discovered a deep loneliness. So she began to practice being with that loneliness, just sitting with herself, holding herself in that experience and saying to herself, I'm here. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I will not abandon you. And she discovered that she had capacity to be with it, and it became less scary. And over time, she was able to identify more with that part of herself, the part that could hold the loneliness, that could be with it, than the loneliness itself. And eventually she was actually able to return to her dating life and was able to enter a healthy and sustaining relationship. So we're learning to hold ourselves, to be with what is arising in a loving and compassionate way. And so I want to bring this inspiration and this guidance into our practice today, this kind of simple process of self-compassion, which is, again, mindfulness, dropping the story and being with, naming, acknowledging what is arising in the moment, invoking the sense of shared humanity, acknowledging that this suffering is part of the human experience, while also not dismissing the individual uniqueness. And then extending kindness towards ourselves. May I give myself what I need. May I meet this moment with kindness. And so with that, let's settle into our practice for today, inviting you to find a posture in the body that will be supportive of mindful presence, a posture that is both relaxed and also alert, also upright and awake. We might close the eyes or simply soften the gaze, just inviting ourselves into a fuller presence. Inviting ourselves home to this moment, right here, right now. And softening, opening to what is here, to what is true in this moment as it emerges. Allowing the mind, the attention to gently rest. And an anchor, it could be the breath or the body. Allowing ourselves to more fully arrive here in the present moment. Noticing the wandering mind and just gently returning to Shuva, return this breath, this body, this moment, again and again. Coming home, settling in. You're welcome to simply sit here in this presence, returning again and again to the present moment. Simply being with what is here as it emerges. And if you'd like to practice with self-compassion, you can engage this 3-step process. So first, identifying something challenging, something difficult in your experience. It could be something happening right now, or something that has been challenging lately. And simply acknowledging it, just naming it on the level of experience, whatever it is. This is anxiety. This is distraction. This is sadness. See if you can drop the story that tends to arise and simply name the experience. And then acknowledging that this suffering is a universal human experience. Again, not dismissing the individual uniqueness, but just acknowledging that it is a human experience. Something that other human beings experience as well. We're not alone in this. Noticing what happens in the body or in the heart in that acknowledgement. There's no right or wrong. response, just noticing. And then finally, extending kindness, extending compassion to ourselves in that experience. Perhaps putting a hand on the heart, invoking a wish for well-being. May I meet this with kindness, this experience. May I give myself what I need. May I be relieved from this suffering or blessing. May I be blessed with healing. May I be held in compassion. It's okay if the emotional experience, the feeling isn't there. It's more about the practice, the intention of meeting ourselves in this way. And it might help to imagine someone who loves you unconditionally. How might they respond to you in this moment? And that can be a way into accessing that self-compassion, borrowing compassion from someone who deeply loves you. And we'll continue to practice in this way. Naming what is arising, acknowledging the shared humanity in that experience, and meeting it with kindness, however we can. As we come to the end of our practice, I invite you to just take 5 deep breaths. And as we deepen here midway through the month of Elul, in our practice of this time, our self-inquiry, may we remember to bring compassion and kindness to ourselves, to others. May we remember that we are never alone, not in our suffering or in our joy. And may we really let in the resource and the support that is there. If we can open to the truth of our togetherness. Thank you all so much for your kind attention, for your practice, and your presence today.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. We're going to invite Cantor Jan Mahler, who's one of our regular participants, to sound the shofar for us. Of course, the shofar, hearing the sound of the shofar during the month of Elul, one of our primary spiritual tools for awakening in the month of Elul. Thanks in advance, Jan, for sounding the shofar for us, and everyone's invited just to attune yourself to the sound. Jan, I think you have to move closer. You can't hear. Still can't hear. Nothing. Okay. All right.
Can you hear me?
Now you can hear your voice, can't hear the shofar. And try again. A little bit. Okay, well, I think we're going to have to, Jan can't hear us, so I think we're just going to have to engage our imagination for today. I
Turn
think
the volume. I just turned the volume. Let me try it again.
Okay, there you go. Okay. Right, we'll have to address that. Jan, we heard a little. Everyone can engage their imagination a bit for today. And friends, we end our sit practice today, as we always do, by offering those of you who are mourning or observing your site an opportunity to recite the Kaddish. You can put the name or names of those you're honoring today in the chat now or after we recite the Kaddish. And if you're not reciting Kaddish, please stay present for those who are invited to join me by rising in body or in spirit to recite the Kaddish together, and invite you to unmute at this time. Yitkadal, Yitkadash, Shemei Rabbah, Yamad Arad, Lifnute,
Nayechon, Yomechon, Yedaho, Bekishel, Ogalav, Bishman, Karib, Vimru, Amish, Rabba, Milam, Olame, Olmaya,
Amen.
Thanks for sharing.
Friends, thanks for joining us today, as always. And if you're leaving now, we hope you'll join us tomorrow for our session led by Kohenet Gesher Hillel Fife. And Rebecca will be back on Thursday to lead us, and Rabbi Sam Smith on Friday. Reminder for those of you who are participating in the Shofar project that our practice session tonight with Kohenet Kashira is at 8 p.m. Eastern time tonight. Hope you'll join us for that if you're able to. And thanks as always to Jet Bachman for holding our text space so beautifully. As always, everyone's invited to stay on, either to stick with your practice and use this time and space and the container of this community, or to share reflections in the chat on your experience with the practice, and or to ask questions of Rebecca about today's teaching. So here we go. Thank you. People hearing me okay? Getting a message? Yes? Okay, good. We're having a Divic in our text system today. Rebecca, thanks so much, as always. Here's my question. I just thought it was, first of all, it was just like a beautiful, lucid, clear teaching about integrating mindfulness practice and into this season, the theme of this week about wanted to invite you to delve a little bit into the, what we, for lack of a better term, like, or my term, the spiritual element or dimension of this practice. It struck me like what you were offering could be, one could experience this purely on an emotion, on an emotional, psychological level, right, of recognizing what is true. I want to invite you to, if you would, maybe you want to challenge the premise of my question, but invite you to talk about, like, if I were to ask you, well, what's spiritual about this? Where's God in this? Because all of that was described without a reference to God, the divine, the sacred. How would you fill that in terms of the steps that you were describing, the kind of meeting the moment as it is without getting stuck in it, the compassion and kindness that we offer ourselves, the awareness of not being alone in it, right? Strikes me that all of these, right, have spiritual components.
Yeah, definitely. Yes.
I'm sure we're on quite the same
I
page
would
here.
Challenge the premise of your question. I think
okay, good.
for me is, well, Mark, what does spirituality mean to you? What does God mean to you?
Yeah.
Because for me, it's all wound up in each other, and love, compassion. Like, to me, there's really nothing more spiritual and more godly than that. And I think, often I know for myself in terms of spirituality and God, it's like when I'm searching for something else, that's when I get confused. When I'm like, there's something else here. It's not just love. Love is too simple. It's not something supposed to be more complicated. It's like, actually,
I guess when I put it this way, like, just stick with that for a minute, okay? Because as I really appreciate how you lifted up that, people often associate this season with this kind of you said browbeating, right? Like this kind of harsh judgment. And there's plenty of ammunition for that argument, right? In the liturgy and in our sacred texts of, a wrathful, judgmental, angry, quick to blame God in all the narratives and in the liturgy. That's there. But also what you were describing is also there. the loving, forgiving, infinitely patient, present, always there, that God's there too. That in some sense, trusting that love is at the essence of the spiritual reality in which we live, that we can test out in our experience, right? It's like that.
Yeah.
I wish that were the case, so I'm going to act as if that were the case, but no, like I really, can experience this as true.
Yeah.
That, and also the idea of stepping out of the story. That the story that, here's what I'm going, I guess this is what I'm going for, like the story that we work up in our mind is is a facet or a product of the illusion that we are separate, that we're a separate self, and we're the ego, and that tells the story about it, which whatever it tells, it's about itself. But the experience itself, being flush with the experience, may I meet this moment fully, like may I meet it, I don't remember exactly how you put it, but about meeting it with kindness and without a sense of it being a threat. It's kind of like entering into reality. That is a spirit that we're naming that as, that's a spiritual moment, right?
Yes.
That's this Hineni kind of moment. That's what I'm going for. Not that like, why didn't you say anything about God? But that just like to lift up that is a spiritual moment. That's saying that feeling a sense of kindness and compassion towards oneself isn't just like wishful thinking. That actually is, part of what's happening in that moment. That's where I'm going.
Totally, 100%. And I think there's nothing more spiritual than direct experience, direct encounter. I think that's often what we're really getting at, and kind of at the heart of when we're talking about spirituality and Jewish spirituality. It's like, these aren't just ideas. This is about experience. And as Jews, we're taught that each one of us has the capacity to have that direct encounter with the divine without an intermediary. And the Chagim, the high holidays, certainly Yom Kippur especially, well, Rosh Hashanah too, are two of the major moments on our calendar where we're invited into that direct encounter with divine reality. And, I think part of the, what sometimes appears or is presented as like this wrathful, kind of angry or judgmental version or garment for the divine, the way that that's meaningful for me is just in the way that it can evoke that sense of Yirat Hashem. Is often translated as like a fear and trembling or a fear and awe. But to me, it's really like the profound humility in the face of the reality of the impact of our actions. So this is a time of year where we're saying, no, we're not shying away. We're not pretending that everything's okay. We're getting real. We're getting real about the truth that when we act in ways that are unconscious, there's impact on ourselves and others, and it matters. And it can be a matter of life and death in big or small and subtle ways. And it's our time to get real about that and be honest about that. And at the same time, acknowledge that change and healing and learning and growth does not happen through shaming and blaming and making wrong. It actually happens through compassion and understanding. And you can test that in the laboratory of your own experience and your own memory. But I would invite you also to reflect, has there been a time in your life with another person even where someone grew or changed their behavior because they were kind of beaten down, and like that actually happened in a way that was true and sustaining? That has not been true in my experience. In my experience, it has been through compassion and listening that has sometimes had to be very strong and profound and long lasting and patient. And I think, to bring in God again, part of our practice on the high holidays and our liturgy is to recite the 13 attributes of mercy, where we are saying out loud as a community and affirming, like, this is the divine. The divine is compassionate. The divine is patient. The divine is loving. And we are in the image of the divine, and in a way it's like we're calling out these qualities and affirming them in ourselves.
Right. And one of the other pieces of your teaching about, like, saying, feeling that resonance of not being alone in this, right? Oh, you also did this, or you also feel, are feeling as I do, that there's a spiritual quality in that's in the liturgy too. The well, especially on Yom Kippur, the the confessions and the alchait and the sort of sense that we're all imperfect, we're all flawed, and we're willing to admit, we're willing to acknowledge that in the context, like you said, of like all wrapped in this blanket of those 13 qualities that you were just describing, right? It's like
Yes.
Yom Kippur is like such a powerful day of like because we feel that love and compassion towards us, we are freed from the shame, from the fear, from the excessive guilt, to be able to acknowledge fully, did that, and I know there are consequences, and I'm going to come back. And so in terms of like meditation practice, even in that minor note of, oh, I was daydreaming, I forgot, I came here for meditation and I lost it. But catching ourselves when we missed the mark or lost our intention, it's so telling what comes up for us in that moment of like, that sort of like, right? To like cultivate the ability to say, oh, that kind of sweetheart attitude towards, just come on back, it's okay, right? There is a question. Go ahead. Go and respond.
Well,
to
I
that.
was just going to say, what you're saying brings up a reminder for me that's been really helpful this season, which is the reminder that I think it has to do with mindfulness practice, and it also has to do with teshuvah, that the point of practice or teshuvah is not that you should never wander away. Like the mind will always wander away. That's not the point. We're not trying to cultivate a mind that never wanders. The practice is the return.
Right.
Similarly with teshuvah, the point of being a human being is not that you should never mess up, or you should never cause harm, or you should never get lost, but that you return when you do, right? That you care, that you learn from that. That's the practice here, is the return itself. We're not trying to be perfect. That's not what we're aiming for. It's the repair and the repairing the brokenness and acknowledging when we've missed the mark that we're cultivating.
Okay, everybody, you can just take the recording of that and play that on a loop for the next 3 weeks.
It's a really important point, right?
It is underline, bold, large font.
In personal relationship too, I was recently listening to or reading something probably on Instagram about like dating, successful relationships. And she said, like, what are some marks of a real successful romantic relationship? And she was saying that they fight, and they fight well, that they're actually able to fight and have disagreements and hard conversations, and then they can repair and they come back together. So it's not that they never make each other mad or do things that miss the mark, but it's that they know how to repair and have those hard conversations. And I know for me, that's really true in my relationships, especially intimate relationships. It's like, I want to know what it's like when things actually get hard, and how do we come back from that? How do we return? How do we forgive? How do we make repair? So yeah.
So important. All right. Did not get to some of the questions in the chat. The good news is that Rebecca will be back on Thursday. Make a note of some of these questions, and we'll bring it back around. But Rebecca, as always,
yeah.
What? Sorry?
It's a juicy topic.
Yes,
self-compassion, forgiveness. It's a big one.
It is a big one. It's a big one. Okay. Thanks so much for the beautiful teaching, and thanks, Jan. We're going to work the kinks out for next time, and thanks for being here. Thanks to Jet for holding our space. Thanks to each of you for being here, making time in your day to practice and create this community together. We hope to see you tomorrow to practice with Kohenet Yeshua Havat Life. Many blessings, everyone.